it's like you're a kid. You're seeing stuff for the first time, and you're like learning everything for the first time. And it's quite a fun way to live your life, actually, rather than just taking everything for granted and everything being too easy and comfortable and boring.
Welcome to the Travel with Meaning podcast, the show that talks with artists, entertainers, entrepreneurs, chefs, athletes, CEOs, and travel industry experts to hear their travel stories that have impacted their lives and careers. I'm your host, Mike Scheibel. Join us on an epic adventure. Hey, what's up, community? And welcome back to my conversation with Amy and Nick of What the Pho Podcast. This is part 2. If you didn't get a chance to listen to part 1 yet, make sure you go back and check that out. We talk all about our shared experience and our time in Austria together as part of the Untold Stories Series that the Austrian Tourism Board had put together. It was truly one of the coolest experiences I've ever had on that trip. Not just being in Austria and the just stunning nature, the hikes we took in the Alps, or even visiting the Hintertux Glacier. We skied on the glacier and then we went inside the glacier, which honestly was definitely top 2 experiences I've ever had in nature. The food was amazing. And then our stay at the Alpine Resort Sachar in Seefeld, hands down, probably the greatest resort I've ever been to. I think Austria has every component of wellness that you really could ask for. Nature, spas, great food, good people. I honestly could talk all about Austria for days, but we talked more about it on part 1, so make sure you go back and check that out. This episode, we're going to talk to Amy and Nick to find out who they are as travelers, what are their meaningful moments, and of course, where this idea came from to launch What the Pho Podcast. Enjoy part 2 of my conversation with Amy and Nick of What the Pho Podcast. You know, I will say, like, I just adored getting to know both of you, and I think you both do such a great job as the way you do your podcast and the way you kind of really just complement one another. I think you both separately are such unique travelers. And then when you came together as this force of pho, if you will.
Nice, I like it. Maybe that's a new name for the podcast, Force of Pho.
I've been working on that one. It's like a Star Wars thing, but no. Tell us more about, like, I guess, what really laid the foundation for you to where you are now, like those trips that like really left a big impact.
So I come from a family who just have holidays. I don't say just as in that small, like we were lucky to do it, but I mean, they were very safe, not adventurous. And just, yeah, like we'd get a hotel or a villa and it'd be like just us by the pool. And I mean, I loved it. It was great, but it wasn't like my parents instilled this whole adventure side in me where I always wanted to go like somewhere dangerous and daring. I'm not really sure where that came from. The only thing I can think of is 2012. So I was about 21.
Yeah,
I was about 21. And I wrote a bucket list because I felt that I was just so scared of doing stuff all the time. Like I was scared of heights, I was scared of public situations, and I just really wanted to just like let go and just be like, right, I'm going to force myself to do a bunch of stuff that makes me uncomfortable and see what happens. And it was the best thing I've ever done. From like, you know, paragliding off a cliff in Switzerland to milking a cow in India. There were very random items on the bucket list.
Sounds like it.
It's just forced me to do a bunch of stuff that I never, unless I'd written it on that bucket list, I wouldn't have done it. So I know this is kind of, it sounds like it's veering away from travel, but it was really the basis of where my adventurous side started. But before that, you know, I'm going to bring him up because we all want to hear about him because he became quite a focal point of our trip. It was a bit of a running joke that I kept talking about my ex-boyfriend, but my ex-boyfriend, it was Argentinian. I was literally like 15. My parents had a house in Spain, and so I was just surrounded by Spanish people. That's where I learned Spanish, and I met this guy or boy. And I learned Spanish from there. And because he was Argentinian, but he lived in Spain, it was always my dream to head to South America. And I just really immersed myself in that sort of culture. I used to salsa dance, anything Latin, Spanish, like loved it. That was me. Most of my friends when I was a teenager were listening to, like, I don't know, 90s pop, noughties pop and rap. There was me. There's Club 7. There was me listening to like Santana or like what's the DJ? Oh, what's his name? Who does the petrol song, Gasolina song?
Oh,
Daddy Yankee.
Yeah.
There's me listening to Daddy Yankee as a little like rap teenage girl. So yeah. Also on the other side of that, I went to the school that I went to. My best friend was Mexican, so she came all the way from Mexico to go to this school, and we became best friends. And she invited me back to Mexico. So my first proper overseas trip away from Europe and England was Mexico, and so that was a massive uncomfortable moment for me. Like I loved it looking back, but I was so homesick. I didn't like any of the food. And this is what I mean. I was so unadventurous. I was eating apples all day, every day. I didn't eat tacos and all these like incredible foods. Now I lap that up. Like I want to eat everything, but I was just so frightened of everything. That was kind of my childhood. And then as soon as I got to like teenage years, I was like, this has got to stop. I need to push myself.
Really? How old were you when you took that trip? That we'll call it the Apple trip.
I was 13.
Wow. And you just went by yourself to stay with your friend from school.
Yeah. So we were like because we were under 16, we were chaperoned through like the airports and stuff, but we weren't with our parents because her parents were there, my parents were here. So
I like that you use the word uncomfortable, and like looking back on that of like probably the you now is like, oh, I wish I had that situation. But sometimes you have to come through that, what you don't like, to get to the other side.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Like, especially again, going back to the anxiety thing, like I've had anxiety really bad the last couple of years, and it's taught me so much. And actually the whole like common thing when they say, oh, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And it totally is. Like, I think the harder something is, the more uncomfortable it's going to get, the better the reward, for sure.
Wow. So that seems like it was a pretty impactful trip for you to kind of set you up. And like, was there another moment you said, like, then you got in your teenage years later and you were like, oh no, I want to kind of push myself, and like, do you know that trip that you kind of started getting outside your comfort zone?
Yeah, well, so other than the trips that I've mentioned so far, I didn't fully proper start backpacking travel until we met. And actually,
when you guys met, and like, well, I want to hear the rest of this, but when you guys met, and correct me if I'm wrong, and Nick, we want to get to your backstory in a second, but like, I feel like you guys met at a party and you just started talking about travel, and like that was like the moment, exactly. Right?
Yeah, good memory. Yeah,
well done, Nick. And I love that you've upgraded from the other guy we talked about.
This makes it well. You say that. I'm going to bring another guy into the mix now.
Obviously, you are.
When we met, I actually had a boyfriend.
So many ex-boyfriends.
I know, right? Sorry.
So, I had a boyfriend. We met at this party. It's like we met by the buffet, and I just feel like that's so poignant to our relationship because we love food. We met by the buffet and instantly started talking about traveling. Had a really great connection. We had a really big click. And Nick, he asked for my number, and I said, I'm really sorry, but I have a boyfriend, so I can't give you my number. Long story short, we met at a second party. Shall I tell the story that's going to embarrass myself? I was incredibly drunk, and I just ran. I saw him across the room, and I was like, oh my God, it's that guy. I'd been thinking about him because we had such a good connection. And I ran across the room drunk and just shouted, I'm single now.
Wow.
So I gave him the big in there.
That's the green light.
But from the very first, so for when we did exchange numbers, he put his number in, or his name in, as Nick the Traveler, and it's still that today.
17 years later.
Yeah. And so like we just had such a connection. So I hadn't traveled fully by that point, and I when we met, I just said, I want to go traveling. Like that's all I want to do. And then we got together and made it happen.
What was your first trip together?
Very first trip was, I think, Spain. You came to visit me at my house, but we don't really class that as a trip. But Venice was our first trip. Yeah,
that's like a little vacation, romantic weekend away. But I'd answer that question with Southeast Asia. Like, yeah, it was like 2 or 3 years into us being together. It did take us a little while to build up the courage to do it. Money, yeah, to do a big trip. But that was Southeast Asia, yeah, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Cambodia, and Indonesia.
And how long was that trip?
was only a month. We had to work out like time off work, off our jobs. So yeah, I'd prefer to spend a month in all of those places that I've just said, those 4 countries, but we squeezed them all into a 1 month trip.
What was your takeaway from Finland, and tell us about the cold dip?
We really liked it, and I've also found out that I am Finnish, but I think Nick actually liked it more than I did. I really liked it, but you were saying that you would live there.
Yeah, I want to live there. I'm jealous. I want to be Finnish, and I'm not. DNA speaking, I'm 0% Finnish. I really liked it. It's a place, I've got a lot of respect for all the Scandinavian countries, how the people are really happy, but they're the highest taxpayers in the world. Like, work that one out. Everything works. I know we're talking about Austria. Everything works. It's safe. It's clean. Similar thing. But just in these Scandinavian countries, these like welfare states, everything is given to you for free. But it's because you're paying high taxes, like free childcare, free healthcare, free school, like university, free everything. But of course, you're paying for it in high taxes. But everyone just seems happy. Life just seems good in these parts of the world. And I really liked the sauna culture.
Sauna.
I mean, yeah, sauna. I mean, we experienced it a lot in Austria, loved it. But now, like, we went to the homeland of sauna, and I want to do it every day. Like, one of our tour guides, she has like a membership at this local sauna place, and she says every day before work she has some sauna time, jumps in cold water, and goes to work. And I want to do that. I want to do that every day.
I don't know if I told you guys, but it's like, my family is Finnish, and like we have a cabin in northern Minnesota, so we sauna quite a bit there. You shared with me when we were in Austria, and I love this, about your first big trip, and I think it was like coming to America.
Yeah, so what started it all off was it was Camp America, which I know a lot of you guys, like in the States, you have summer jobs working at camps. It's quite a big thing for Europe, not just English, I'd say, because there was lots of Europeans, European people. When you are like 18, 19, 20, 21, it's a big deal to go to America for the summer, like the USA, work at a camp, which helps with like it's quite easy to get a visa if you've just got a summer camp job. You earn a bit of money, and then when you're done working at the camp, you can spend that money traveling afterwards. So that's what I did. I've worked at a camp in Lake Placid, New York State.
Did you know anything about Lake Placid before you got there?
There's a film, right, about a massive alligator / shark or something in the water. No,
I've not seen it.
I don't know anything about that. I only knew it was the Olympics.
Yeah, so they did have the winter.
Oh yeah, those
Winter Olympics there. No, there was a film. There's a horror film about Lake Placid. That's all I knew about it.
Oh, I thought it was really famous.
Okay, maybe not.
What did you do at the camp?
So it's funny because I had zero experience in any of the things I'm about to tell you. I was an archery instructor, a canoe or kayak instructor, and there was one more thing which it escapes me now.
Something to do with bears, right? Staying.
Oh well, we were given training in how to what to do if you're confronted by a bear, and there's not much you can do actually, but it's just nice to know that in future, if you see a bear and you're responsible for the lives of a group of kids, not much you can do. Sacrifice the weakest one, and run.
Yeah, there you go.
No, fortunately, there's no bear encounters. So it was, great experience. I was only 18 years old. Probably now I think about it, probably too young really to be responsible for a group of kids. But it worked out fine. I had to grow up quickly. So it was tough. Like, I was glad when it ended, but great experience. We're just talking about discomfort and how these experiences make you better. So that's how I got to the States. And then once camp finished, traveled loads of places on the East Coast, a lot of the big cities there. Initially with a group of other camp counselors that I met at the camp. We traveled around to a few of the big cities on the East Coast. Then I left them to see some friends who I met many years ago, but some friends in Kansas. So I went in the middle of America, which was cool. Not many people see that side of the USA, which is a good experience. Then from there flew to LA. And then from LA, I paid to do like a group tour and met up. So we met up a big group, a bit like what we did in Austria, group of us. And it was like in a minibus. We drove from LA to New York, so coast to coast, but we went along the south, so like through Arizona, Texas,
Tennessee.
through Tennessee, Alabama, like Virginia, and so we'll go back a bit, Utah. And so, yeah, saw some amazing places. Me personally, because I've seen some of like the Northeast big cities, of course, like New York, Philadelphia, Boston, amazing places. But in my opinion, I think, oh yeah, we've got cities like that in Europe. So like, even though it is a long way from home, it didn't really feel like it. And New York, we've all seen it on TV and films. We feel like we know New York because it's so familiar. Great experiences, don't get me wrong, but I felt like the South, USA, was just a real cool experience for a foreigner to see, you know, like cowboy land. Yeah, like feel like I'm in a Western film. So really enjoyed it. And then, so I was only 18 years old at the time. Great to see another part of the world. And then we joke that I think at one point I said to Amy when I then met her later, I said, oh yeah, travel. I've done travel. I've been to the USA, baby. I've seen it all. I don't need to travel anymore. But then I soon changed my mind.
So these were both kind of like separate, two like huge, big travel moments in your life, right? Amy, time in Mexico or Spain and that stuff. And Nick, when you're big travel moments in the States, right? And then when you guys connect and Nick became Nick the Traveler and you take this first trip, when did you guys start thinking you want to do longer trips? And where did the idea for the podcast come up?
Yeah, because actually I would say when we were on it, our first trip when we went round to like Thailand, Indonesia and all that lot, it was a rough trip. Like I remember, when we got back to, I think it was Heathrow Airport, I kissed my passport and I was like so happy to be home. I felt like such a home girl at that point. And I thought, oh my God, I'm just so glad I'm home. We're safe. It was such a big culture shock. So actually, if you'd asked me on that trip, will you travel again? I would have said no, for sure. Right. I think you have to go through again, it's that uncomfortable thing, right? Like you have to go through all of that.
You keep coming back to this.
Yeah. My life is just uncomfortable. But then after that, why did we go traveling again?
it's a bit, you know, like when you then look back on a trip that was last year, you forget about the bad stuff and you remember the good stuff. And then you might watch an inspiring video on YouTube or listen to an inspiring podcast and you think, actually, let's try that travel thing again. And then we did. And like, so what followed that was 2 trips to India and to Nepal. Wow. So back over the Asia side. And that was a bit more extreme. We were with a tour group around India, which I would recommend. If we wanted to be more adventurous, we would have done it by ourselves. But we felt like we weren't ready for that.
Yeah, not at that point. I think most of the time we've traveled, it has been just us two. But at the early days, we did travel in groups more.
And then there was a point where Amy had a job working in radio. She was a radio producer for the BBC. So she had kind of, you know, she had this audio background and these skills. And it was her idea to start a podcast. Naturally, you know, what should we talk about? Let's talk about travel. But I wasn't supposed to be on the podcast. It was going to be Amy's thing. So she could do something kind of to help build up her career in radio, because when you apply for future jobs, they like it if you've done some extra curriculum activities, and Amy's would have been a podcast.
Yeah.
So you invited me on episode 1 and we spoke about, like we're doing today, we spoke about
she couldn't get rid of you.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed it.
I was going to say, couldn't get rid of him. Yeah.
I really enjoyed it. And I said, it's me and you now on this podcast. But it just started as something that was fun. I was a podcast fan before we started doing the podcast together. I had a job which meant I drove a lot, so I was listening to podcasts a lot and radio. I really liked the idea of making something myself. And at first, it's just for fun. Not many people listened for the first year or 2. My mum listened and that was about it. She left a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. But then after a few years, like, it's starting to grow. And then we got to a point where we actually then quit our normal jobs. We used our podcast to travel around the world, working with different like tour companies or tourist boards. So we never asked for money, but a bit like what we just did in Austria, it was a great way through our podcast. It was a great way to open some doors and see places for free. So we'd contact a certain tourist board or a tour company, the best story, is when we're in South America. We'll talk more about South America soon because we love it. But we were in Ecuador, and this is a great example of how we used the podcast to travel. We wanted to see the Galapagos Islands, but we couldn't afford it. So I sent about 5 emails out to 5 different cruise companies that do tours around the Galapagos Islands. 4 never replied to me. 1 said, yeah, they said, if you can like get to us by tomorrow, there's a spare room on our cruise ship. It's a week-long trip around the islands. You can have it for free as long as you make a podcast to promote our company. And we said yes. Actually, at first we said no.
We don't normally tell this part of the story.
This is brilliant. We said no at first because the deal was, if we could fly ourselves to the Galapagos Islands, then we can get on the ship for free. But the flights were like maybe like £5, yeah, so maybe $500-600 each, just for like a 1-hour flight. And we're thinking,
which when you come from Europe, when you can get we've got 1-hour flights for like £1 before. Yeah. So that to us was crazy.
So we actually said, I was hoping that you'd pay for our flights as well. So we're going to have to say no, thank you for the offer. And then this woman, bless her, I was emailing, she emailed back, said, I don't think you realize what you're saying no to. This is a once in a lifetime trip. Like it costs like $12,000 per person to do this cruise for a week. And so we said, okay, credit card, we booked the flights, and then we did it. And it was like the best week of our life.
Yeah, it was the best trip. Like if somebody took all my travels away and they said you could keep 1 week of memories, I would keep that week.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I would think, I know, should I keep the week with
apart from Austria?
Yeah, I mean,
it was up there. It was. So what about that week? What about that week? If you're saying that was like the most meaningful, impactful thing for both of you?
It was just, you know who Attenborough is, right?
Yeah, of course.
David Attenborough. So yeah, if somebody doesn't know, he is a documentarian from the UK, and he does these science documentaries, and it was where he basically started his career, and then he also went back as a elderly man that he is now. We're all very scared of the moment that he may pass, but he will live forever, so it's fine. But when we were on this trip, it was like we were inside one of his documentaries. Like there were times when we were surrounded by sharks, we were in the water and the pelicans were feeding right by us, and we were like watching them under the water. We were swimming with seals. We were just completely immersed in nature.
And what, if someone's listening and they've heard of the Galapagos Islands, but they don't really know what the big deal is, it's because they're so isolated. The animals that live there, they've just lived there kind of on their own for hundreds of thousands of years, and they haven't had predators. So the animals aren't scared of you. So it's one, not the only, but it's one of the only places in the world you could walk up to, like a sea lion, because they're chilling out on like park benches.
Weird.
You can walk up to a sea lion. They've got loads of different seabirds. The blue-footed boobies are our favorites. They got tortoises, but yeah, all these animals, you can just like walk right up to them, take a picture, have a selfie with them, and they're not scared because they've never had predators. And that's like the magic of the Galapagos Islands.
So it seems like one of the big takeaways is be a yes for the adventure.
It's I'm embarrassed that we said no.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I think back to the anxiety or back to things, I think that's a real feeling, right? But when you work through it and you get there, and you said no, but it worked out.
Yeah, and because we were traveling full time for over a year, so any large sum of money we spend, it literally eats into the trip. So that's like, what was, so £800, that would have been like a month less that we were going to be traveling because of this flight. And so we were thinking, is the gamble? And we didn't know, but now I've been there, I obviously know it was 100% the right choice to go.
It was worth it. But what I do want to mention is, so the podcast was great for things like that, but it wasn't just great for like getting free trips. It opened loads of doors, and we met lots of interesting people. So like, for example, if we were just normal travelers and we didn't have our podcast, we wouldn't be reaching out to people to hear about their stories or to learn about the local culture in such detail.
Like Palestine's a good example.
Yeah, exactly. So in Palestine, we wanted to learn about what exactly is happening with Palestine and Israel. Like, I heard that there's conflict going on, but what's really happening? And because we had our podcast, we wanted to interview people. And that led to us finding this family. They're actually on Airbnb, this Palestinian family. They live in a refugee camp. Next thing we know, we're spending the night in a Palestinian refugee camp. We wouldn't have done that if it wasn't for our podcast. And even there was times where like we were in Colombia and we were making a podcast about how there's a big economic crisis in Venezuela and most of the Venezuelan people are leaving. And because we were making this documentary for our podcast, I was finding people online, emailing them. We went to like this border town in Colombia, Cucuta, in the middle of nowhere, but yeah, right on the border of Venezuela. No tourists ever go there. But because we were trying to make an interesting podcast episode, it took us there. And as I said before, if we were just tourists, we never would have gone there. So the podcast has forced us to meet interesting people, start interesting conversations, make friends with people for life, and just go places that most tourists would never normally go.
Let's talk about the title. Tell us exactly how this came together and what were the runner-ups for ideas for the title of the show.
We've never been to Vietnam.
Yeah, we've actually never been. We've only eaten pho on like 2 occasions, but here in the UK,
So
what the pho?
Yeah. We just bloody love a pun.
we just wanted something that sounded catchy and funny, and I don't know.
Yeah,
People have told us they saw the podcast, saw the title, and they thought, because of that title, they then listened. It is important to think of a name that jumps out.
Yeah, and like I do think just because it's a pun, I think it hopefully shows that it's an entertaining, funny side of travel, because that, like, obviously we go into the peaks and troughs of it all as well, the light and shade, but ultimately our podcast, our main idea is that we want people to listen to it and be entertained, but they're learning without them even realizing it. So we might be telling you a bunch of facts, but we're doing it in a fun way. And hopefully by the end of it, you just feel like you've had a good time, but actually you've learned a load of stuff. So like Nick said, he's really into history, but history isn't everybody's cup of tea. So, you have to make it interesting. So yeah, bang a load of production in it. Like we have something called Game Show Facts. It's a feature where Nick will just reel off like in a game show type way, loads of facts, and then I'll go into like language. But yeah, I just think we wanted a title that had a little fun to it, but it was also traveling.
Where were you in your travels when you both said, let's do the podcast?
We'd already done our big trip. We'd done our trip around Asia, the one that we spoke about, Thailand, Indonesia. We'd also done a trip around Australia, New Zealand. And I remember specifically coming up with ideas and brainstorming on a piece of paper in Spain, just planning out how I wanted it to be. And you were just like helping me. But
yeah, like you said, we'd already done some trips to several places in Asia and Australia, but then so like we'd already got the taste for it. We knew we loved to travel. Then there was a point where we started the podcast where I wish we started this a few years ago. So when we were in some of these locations like Thailand, we could have interviewed people, because we kind of we transitioned from a place where we were talking about on the podcast previous travels, which is fine, talking about previous travels. But then we got to a point where we were doing new travels, so we could actually record the podcast on location in places, which I thought made for a more entertaining show.
Yeah, definitely. And that's how we travel with it now. So we go there with an idea of who we want to interview and what information we want to get, but then we just let the rest of it kind of happen as it is there. It's like if something happens, we're like, oh, that would be great. Let's get the sounds for that and put it all together.
2-part question. One is, what do you think is the most meaningful experience story you've had, if it's something you haven't shared yet? And then what story did you learn while we were in Austria that was an untold story that was really, I guess, remarkable for you?
Yeah, so the first question, story that we have on our podcast that we haven't spoke about yet is we interviewed a Syrian refugee. And so this guy traveled in a lorry all the way to the UK, or not all the way, but in boats and lorries. He nearly died in the lorry because I believe was it flour or sand that was in there?
Yeah, like bread flour, and it's really hard to breathe.
And I think there was like seven people in there, and there was a child as well. And they all kept telling our guest to like the other men in the lorry were saying, don't bang on the side, because the driver didn't know that they were in there. But he ultimately knew he was going to die, so he banged on the side of the lorry, and it saved all of their lives, where the other men were just going to keep quiet and potentially die. So yeah, that was a really harrowing story to listen to.
Well, before you go into that, like, there's such like an investigative news, like Amy, I know you have like a news producer background side. Like, Nick, did you just kind of stumble into this? Like, just, I know you're a curious history buff. Did you just kind of put your hat on of like investigative reporter kind of thing and just start to get inquisitive about things?
Yeah, I think, with no formal training, I think I just let my curiosity guide me. But also, I mentioned to you before, I'd listened to a lot of podcasts and radio. And I think, I still think today, I had a really good idea of what a listener wants to hear, what makes good radio or what makes a good podcast. And then I just kind of thought, well, I figured that part out. So I just need to figure out how to actually do it and deliver it. But I think more often half the battle, or maybe most of the battle, is, what makes good content? What do people like? And then once you figure that out, then you figure out later how to actually make it. So yeah, I think that stood me in good stead, right? Like, just being a listener, just being a fan. When we visit countries, we always make an effort to try to meet local people. We use an app when we do travel called Couchsurfing, which I know you know what Couchsurfing is. Some people don't. It's exactly the same as Airbnb, but it's free. Oh, actually, I don't think it's free anymore. You pay a small amount to have the app, but then you stay at people's houses for free, and people think, why do you do that? That sounds serial killer-ish. Why would someone want to host you? But it's just such a nice community. It's a great way to travel, to meet people. And the person who's hosting you, what's in it for them is that maybe there's someone who can't afford to travel. So rather than they go to the world, they bring the world to them. Yeah. And we've had it before. When we've had people stay at our house, we feel like we've traveled, which is really nice. So really nice. That app was a great way for us to meet local people. And then just like, rather than me and Amy tell the listeners, what do we think of this country? Like, Brazil is one of our favorites. Oh, we love Brazil because of X, Y, Z. Cool. Like, we do mention the reasons why we like it, but we let the local people do the talking. What's great about your country? What's not great about your country? What do you want the world to know? So a country like Brazil, we might all think of stereotypes like football, sex, music. I don't know. But then there'll be some people in Brazil who think that doesn't represent who I am. That might be a stereotype. So just get people on, ask the local people questions. What do you think? Even if they got something bad to say, like, tell us.
What I mean, how many times have you guys been to Brazil, and what is it about there, and what stories do you guys have for us from that area?
We love Brazil. Eu amo Brasil.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a great country. We've been there 3 times. And in that, we've spent around 4 to 5 months in total in the country. And whenever we meet a Brazilian, they say, oh, where have you been in my country? And like, they always expect you to say, oh, Rio, I've been to Rio, because that's where everybody goes. And of course, we've been there, Rio and Sao Paulo, but we've actually done like pretty much the whole coastline all the way around Brazil. Couch surfing as well. So we couch surfed pretty much the whole way around. So we have friends in almost every city, which is great. And I think couch surfing really is the key of why we love it so much, because we just met the most beautiful people, and just the culture. Oh my goodness, like great food, great churrascos, which are their barbecues. They're just very happy people. We always say that with Brazilians, they could have had the worst day. They could have just lost their job and then broke up with their partner. But then if you say, hey, do you want to meet up? Let's go out. They'll still come out with a smile. They'll always try to cheer themselves up, where a lot of people, understandably, would just want to go home and hibernate and cry. But they're always up for a good time, and they're always happy. They're just always erring on the side of happy. And I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah, they just know how to have fun, man. They know how to live life, because it's not an easy place to live. And all of South America, you can say the same. It's not an easy place to live at all. You've got like political instability, corruption, crime. Like we don't like to promote it, but when people say, "Oh, I'd never go there because it's dangerous," we never had any problems. I think just use some common sense and don't flash your money around and don't wear expensive watches and don't stand out basically. But it's only really the tourist hotspots like Copacabana Beach. That's where you're going to be targeted. If you go to the actual proper like residential neighborhoods we were staying with local people. So that was an advantage that we stuck with them. They knew where to go, where not to go. But my point is, it's not an easy place to live for sure. But they do a great job of, despite all the difficulties, enjoying life and just being really nice people. And what I think is nice is when because we know a lot of Brazilian people that live in Manchester. They're very well traveled. A lot of them, unfortunately, when they get the opportunity, they do leave the country. But I understand why, for a more stable life, a better job, better income. But when a Brazilian meets another Brazilian, they're always so happy to meet each other. Yeah. Apart from, there's one exception. One of our friends doesn't like meeting other Brazilians. But like, if I moved to Australia and I saw an English person, I'm thinking, I haven't come all the way to the other side of the world to hang out with another English person. But the Brazilian, they just love it. They gravitate towards each other. And we just, whenever there's a Brazilian thing going on in Manchester, me and Amy are like, can we come?
We're in the center of it.
Can we be invited as well?
Yeah, I saw you guys at some of the World Cup games with your jerseys on.
Yeah.
Well, I think you just hit on something that I love. It's like, on paper, you see some of these countries or places that maybe these people have nothing, but they're the happiest people. And I think you just described that beautifully with Brazilians of maybe there's instability, maybe there's this, but in their core of who they are, in that reflectiveness, they're beautifully happy people. And I think that's where it starts, right? You love yourself, you love what that is, then that opens up all those other opportunities.
I think you're right, and they're very proud of where they come from, whether they come from a poor background or a rich background. And don't get me wrong, there are filthy rich Brazilians. There's you've got middle class, upper class, and of course a lower class. So there's a mix, but I think with most I'm inverted commas poor countries, because it's not a poor country, but most of these countries, Mexico's similar. There is massive wealth in these countries. It's just not well distributed.
Yeah, and we definitely saw both ends of the scale, because we went into one of the favelas, and a lot of our Brazilian friends were like, what are you doing? Why are you going in there? We were on a tour and we did it safely. But it was great to see, and the people in there were just so generous and so curious of why we were in there. So we were in the street, and there was a guy just chilling on his hammock outside of his house that he built himself, and was drink. So they have a drink there called cachaça, and the most similar thing you could equate it to is maybe vodka or gin, but it's very different. It's made from sugarcane. And he just wanted us to see his house. He was just so proud of his house. And he was like, come in, I want to show you where I sleep. But he didn't have a bed. It was just a hammock that he slept in. And he was just really wanted to show us everything. And then you ended up doing shots with him.
Yeah, drink. But what little he had, he wanted to share it with us. And then I compare that with other countries we've been to where there is poverty, and the people, understandably, the people aren't that generous. But that's what I think is so special about Brazil. Even the poor people who don't have much to offer, they just want to give whatever they can.
Let me ask you both this, and I want you to answer separately. What does travel mean to you?
Discomfort, which is weird. You would think, why would you keep doing that to yourself? But it constantly pushes me, going from somewhere in Asia to South America, completely different cultures. And I love the shock. I love the challenge of it. I love the journey. Maybe not when I'm upset or angry at that point, but you get through it, and the high is so much better.
I knew you'd ask this question, so I've thought about this. This is your thing. Do you know what beginner's mind is?
Ooh.
No, tell us.
It's when you approach life almost like as a child, like you're seeing things for the first time. And I thought that's what it is when I'm traveling, when I'm in a foreign land. It's like you're a kid. You're seeing stuff for the first time, and you're like learning everything for the first time. And it's quite a fun way to live your life, actually, rather than just taking everything for granted and everything being too easy and comfortable and boring. So that's why. And you don't have to go far I don't think, to have that feeling. for you, like it could be you going to another state and just things are a little bit different there than they are in California. For us, it could be the north of England, south of England, Scotland, Wales, and then of course somewhere like India, which is completely different. But it's just experiencing that beginner's mind on different levels. But any level, I think it's fun.
Yeah, well said. I like that you said that. And one thing I like to say with one of these principles of how to travel with me that we've come up with from